Well, can you also, I was thinking about when all this was happening, so we got the 5 out of 6 now counts of guilty. Is there a chance that there could be some federal charges because he attempted to say that there was a hate crime when there wasn't?
Yeah, no, that's an interesting question, interesting observation, but I don't think that it'll come down to that, because it's kind of interesting. They have what they call a PETIT policy, to get in the weeds a little bit, PETIT, which says that, you'll bring a second federal case if substantial rights went unvindicated. So, in simple English, I'm not so sure that they're going to think, the DOJ, main justice, that, there was any big injustice. So I don't anticipate that, but it's an interesting thing to raise and think about.
Yeah, and so we learned a little bit from Dane Placco's reporting there, just a little bit, that the next type of really hearing that we'll have via Zoom late January. Now, what happens from now until then?
Not really all that much. I mean, basically, and you heard some of the other experts explaining it clearly, they have to write up a pre-sentence investigation report. A report like that is in 3 or 4 parts: the person's background, their upbringing, where they went to school. Then you'll have their job history. In this case, there's a celebrity dynamic there, but that's not so relevant necessarily. So, your background, your job, your financial situation, down to the X's and O's, bank accounts, stock accounts, other accounts. And then your criminal history is the 4th one. In this case, I don't believe he has any criminal history. And then the report will give the judge, some guidance as to what the probation department thinks about the severity of the offense, the overall circumstances. So that'll be prepared between now and January. Then in the January meeting, I guess they were saying it's a Zoom meeting, they're going to talk about some scheduling for post-trial motions. That's just very standard, fundamental stuff. They have the right to make certain, motions, a motion ostensibly, for a new trial, things along that nature. But then ultimately a sentencing date will be set and he'll be sentenced. And then some of the questions that kick in will be, if he receives a non-incarceratory sentence, then maybe he won't really pursue it all that much. But you do have sort of legacy and celebrity legacy on the line. So that's a little hard to predict. If he gets a prison term, then there'd be a couple of big issues. The big one is, does he get to remain on bail pending the outcome of an appeal? And that's something that's hotly contested. And generally speaking, and it's a common sense point, if it's a relatively short term, it's more likely that you remain free, on the theory that if it got set aside on appeal, you've already done the sentence. Whereas in reverse, in a super serious case with, let's say, a 10-year mandatory minimum, and the guy gets 20 years, then they may say, well, he's going to have to serve the time now. So I would anticipate, crystal ball, that he'd be allowed to remain free pending appeal. Then you'll have the appeal, and then you'll have the appeal decision.
All right, and what are your thoughts? So 5 out of 6 on the guilty. What do you think would come from sentencing? Are we looking at probation? Are we looking at some possible time?
That's an interesting question, because I've been saying all throughout, and I've heard other experts say it, and it's an important point, and that is that, you read a lot of media articles, and they all said universally, and it was fine, and it was accurate, that, the experts out there are saying that in a case like this, for a first offender with no criminal history, you would expect probation, non-prison term. But then kicks in an interesting dynamic, which is that if the judge feels that he did lie, that's no minor matter. I mean, if you get up on the witness stand, take an oath, raise your right hand, and you're not truthful, and the judge finds that, makes a finding, the judge could take that into account, and for that reason, you could be bringing into play a short prison term. It's hard to say. I can't really handicap that with any great accuracy, but my generic point I'm trying to make is that what ordinarily, had he not taken the stand, let's put it that way, and I don't want people to take this the wrong way, has every right to get up, testify, etc. But had he not, as a practical matter, he wouldn't have faced the possibility, is my point, that a judge could say, the court is finding that you were not truthful in your testimony. That amounts to perjury, and the court is taking that into account in your sentence, etc. So, him getting up there puts a little bit of a wrinkle into the sentencing analysis.
All right, Doug, thank you so much. We appreciate all of your insight right here. What I want to do now for our viewers that continue to watch here from around the country and around the world, I want to go back out to Fox 32 Chicago. We're learning a little bit more of what Jussie Smollett's reaction was inside of the courtroom when those guilty counts were coming down. Let's listen.
Said that court was adjourned, and that's when the attorneys and the judge went back into chambers.
And to describe the scene in the courtroom, it's a fairly large courtroom, as we were saying before. Several rows of old wooden benches, mostly filled with media. But the front row on the right side was all Jussie Smollett's family and a couple of his supporters. You say that when the verdict was read, you didn't see them react in any way.
A lot of them were looking straight ahead, trying not to really give off much of a reaction, it seemed. Again, the judge did say, to control their emotions if they needed to step out of the courtroom, but really very quiet. Not a peep from the family or from Jussie himself. The only thing we did hear Jussie say was when the judge asked if he understood, he said, I do understand.
Any reaction from any of those parties on the not guilty verdict?
No. Really no reaction at all from anyone who was there in the courtroom. It was quite stoic and silent. So we hope to hear from his team as they head down and perhaps get a better idea of what's going through their minds.
Okay, again, we're waiting for everybody to come down from the courtroom, hoping to hear from Mr. Smollett himself. We think we're going to hear from a family member. We don't know if Smollett is going to speak. We'll certainly hear from the attorneys on both sides. Back to you.
All right, Dane, I wanted to ask Casey a question. Thank you for that. Casey, usually in cases like this, they do poll the jury. The defense often asks for that. I've seen that in a lot of cases. Did they poll the jury and ask them one by one, read with the verdict?
They did. Once the verdict was read, the defense team asked for the jury to be polled. At that time, they did ask each jury member what if that indeed was their verdict. They all agreed. They nodded, and that's when the jury members were then dismissed.
Have you seen them come down yet?
The jury was taken out, we believe, a side entrance. We were told that they would be escorted to their vehicles by deputies, extra deputies, we were told. And the judge did ask jury members not to speak to the media until they were off this property, actually, saying, wait until you get to your cars. After you get to your cars, then you're free to speak as you wish.
Just so you know, the setup here, they're parking in a garage across the street, like a multi-level 5-story, I believe, garage on the other side of California, which is part of the Cook County property. So presumably we may not be able to have an opportunity to ask any of the jurors any questions until later this evening.
Yeah, when I was leaving the courtroom, I had to wait a moment because the jury members were being escorted out, and they did not take the main elevator bank down. So they were taken a different way. Not sure if they've already left the building, but again, the judge said that they would have extra deputies escorting them to their vehicles to make sure they actually got into their cars safely and could be on their way.